How did a machine with 4 wheels reshape an entire nation? Not just cities or the economy, but how Americans worked, lived, traveled, and imagined freedom itself. At the turn of the 20th century, the United States was still a country of horses. In 1900, there were roughly 21 million horses and fewer than 10,000 automobiles. Dirt roads dominated rural areas. Most people lived and worked within walking distance of their hometowns. Travel was measured in endurance, not speed. Yet in a single generation, a mechanical device powered by controlled explosions would shrink distances, accelerate time, and transform possibility. At the center of this transformation was Henry Ford, a mechanic from Dearborn, Michigan. He saw the car not as a luxury, but as a tool for the masses. But the Model T's story is not just about one man. It is about industrial vision, engineering innovation, and the democratization of mobility. The internal combustion engine arrived in the US via European invention, but Americans adapted it quickly. In 1893, Charles and Frank Duryea built the first successful gasoline-powered car in America. Around the same time, inventors experimented with adapting stationary engines for mobile use. Henry Ford completed his first vehicle, the Quadricycle, in 1896. It lacked a reverse gear and traditional bodywork. Yet it worked. Its engine converted fuel and air into controlled explosions that moved pistons, which rotated the wheels via a crankshaft, a simple principle with massive consequences. By 1900, dozens of small automakers existed, including Ransom E. Olds. His Curved Dash Oldsmobiles sold over 5,000 units by 1904. But cars remained expensive, assembled largely by hand, and accessible only to the wealthy. Ford believed this model limited both production and mobility. In 1903, I co-founded Ford Motor Company. Early models sold modestly, but I envisioned something radically different. A car so simple and affordable that ordinary Americans could own it. In 1908, the Model T debuted at $825. Its vanadium steel body was durable yet light. Its 20-horsepower engine simplified driving compared to competitors. Pedals controlled forward motion, reverse, and braking. This system was more intuitive than most early cars. Crucially, I designed the Model T for the rough, unpaved roads of rural America. Its high clearance and rugged engineering made it a practical vehicle, not just a luxury. Early production was slow. Cars were assembled by hand. Each worker performed multiple tasks. In 1913, I introduced the moving assembly line at Highland Park, Michigan. The car moved past workers, each performing a single specialized task. Interchangeable parts reduced complexity, and assembly time dropped. The result was industrial acceleration. Production rose from 19,000 Model Ts in 1910 to over 1 million by 1920. Prices fell from $825 in 1908 to as low as $260 by 1925. Ordinary Americans could now afford mobility on an unprecedented scale. Labor conditions changed too. Repetitive tasks increased fatigue and turnover. I introduced the $5 Workday in 1914. This doubled wages and ensured workers could afford the very cars they built. Industrial efficiency and consumer expansion began feeding each other. The Model T expanded economic and social opportunity. Farmers transported goods farther. Doctors reached patients in remote areas. Families traveled beyond railway lines. Teenagers courted outside parental supervision. By 1918, roughly half of all U.S. cars were Model Ts. By 1927, production exceeded 15 million units. Road infrastructure began evolving. The Federal Aid Road Act of 1916 and state programs improved roads. Gas stations, repair shops, and roadside businesses proliferated. Yet this dominance contained hidden vulnerability. Ford's insistence on a single, unchanging model limited consumer choice. Competitors like General Motors began offering variety, styling, and annual updates. By the 1920s, the American automobile industry had matured into a dominant industrial force. Ford had proven that mass production could make cars affordable. But competitors were refining the model. General Motors pursued a strategy of variety over uniformity. While Ford offered only the Model T, GM acquired brands like Buick, Cadillac, and Chevrolet, giving consumers options across price ranges and tastes. GM also introduced annual model changes and financing through GMEC in 1919, expanding access beyond those who could pay cash. This strategy worked. By 1927, GM had overtaken Ford in annual sales. Chrysler emphasized engineering refinement and performance. By the late 1920s, the Big Three defined the industrial scale of American automotive manufacturing. Together, they shaped steel production, rubber and glass demand, and labor markets across the Midwest. The stock market crash of 1929 brought a sudden halt to growth. Production plunged from over 5 million vehicles in 1929 to just 1.4 million in 1932. Factories slowed, layoffs soared, and dealerships closed. Yet even in contraction, innovation continued. Hydraulic brakes improved safety. Independent front suspension systems enhanced ride comfort. Cars were becoming not only transportation tools, but personal spaces, a status symbol for modernity. The industry's adaptability would be fully tested by the next global crisis. During World War II, civilian automobile production halted as factories converted to military manufacturing. Ford's Willow Run plant produced one B-24 bomber per hour at peak output. GM and Chrysler produced aircraft engines, tanks, and trucks. The assembly line, perfected for consumer cars, now powered national defense. By 1945, the war had accelerated industrial capacity and technological expertise. When soldiers returned home, consumer demand surged. Families sought homes in newly built suburbs, and with them, cars became essential infrastructure. From 1945 to 1960, registered vehicles in the U.S. more than doubled, from 25 million to over 60 million. The GI Bill and suburban developments like Levittown created new commuting patterns. Highways, gas stations, drive-in theaters, and motels emerged to serve this expanding car-centered culture. The 1956 Federal Aid Highway Act codified this transformation, authorizing 41,000 miles of interstate highways. The nation was now physically and culturally structured around the automobile. Yet these developments also entrenched dependence on oil, a vulnerability that would resurface during the 1973 OPEC embargo. By the 1960s, the car was central to identity and youth culture. The 1964 Ford Mustang sold over 400,000 units in its first year, igniting the muscle car era. Chevrolet responded with the Camaro, Pontiac with the GTO, Chrysler with high-performance Dodge and Plymouth models. These vehicles celebrated acceleration, power, and style. V8 engines became symbols of freedom and individuality. Highways allowed teenagers and young adults to explore independence beyond city limits. Car culture was no longer utility-driven. It was emotional, aspirational, and deeply entwined with personal identity. However, larger engines and heavier cars increased fuel consumption, making the industry highly sensitive to external shocks. The seeds of the next crisis, oil dependence and efficiency concerns, were already planted. Consider this. In the 1960s, owning a car meant status, freedom, and identity. If you were a teenager during the muscle car boom, would you have prioritized horsepower over practicality, or efficiency over excitement? Share your thoughts in the comments. How do we weigh cultural desire against economic and environmental realities? The muscle car era, fueled by cheap oil and consumer appetite for performance, came to an abrupt end in 1973. The OPEC oil embargo quadrupled oil prices. It caused gasoline shortages and exposed the American automobile industry's deep reliance on petroleum. Prior to the embargo, U.S. car production reached roughly 11.4 million vehicles in 1973. By 1975, it had dropped below 8 million. Suddenly, the large gas-guzzling sedans and muscle cars that defined American streets were liabilities rather than symbols of freedom. In response, the federal government implemented the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. This established corporate average fuel economy, CAFE, standards. Automakers were now required to meet fleet-wide fuel efficiency targets. Engineering priorities shifted. Large V8 engines were downsized. Lighter materials were introduced, and front-wheel drive layouts became more common to reduce weight and improve fuel economy. Emissions regulations from the Clean Air Act of 1970 mandated catalytic converters. This fundamentally changed engine design. Electric and hybrid vehicles remained experimental. but the industry's focus was on extracting more efficiency from internal combustion engines while maintaining affordability and performance. While American automakers adapted slowly, Japanese manufacturers capitalized on efficiency and reliability. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan expanded exports to the United States. By 1980, Japanese imports accounted for nearly 20% of the U.S. market. Toyota's Corolla and Honda's Civic offered smaller, fuel-efficient cars at affordable prices. Japanese factories implemented the Toyota production system. This lean manufacturing model emphasized waste reduction, quality control, and worker empowerment, methods that American manufacturers had yet to fully adopt. The result? American consumers gained higher quality alternatives, and Detroit faced mounting pressure. Plants in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana saw layoffs and community strain. Industrial dominance based on volume alone was no longer enough. The 1980s forced structural change. Chrysler narrowly avoided bankruptcy in 1980 with a $1.5 billion federal loan guarantee. Under Lee Iacocca, Chrysler launched the car, a smaller, efficient front-wheel drive vehicle. GM invested in automation, robotics, and quality initiatives. Ford consolidated platforms and focused on reliability improvements. Meanwhile, foreign automakers began building factories in the U.S. Honda established in Ohio in 1982, with Toyota following soon after. Global production integration reshaped supply chains and blurred the line between domestic and foreign manufacturing. By the late 1980s, U.S. production rebounded to around 10 million units annually. However, competitive pressures had permanently shifted. The industry's challenge was to combine scale with quality, efficiency, and consumer responsiveness. The 1990s brought a focus on safety and electronics. Airbags, anti-lock brakes, and electronic fuel injection became standard. Microprocessors controlled engine performance, emissions, and transmission behavior. The automobile was increasingly defined by software as much as mechanics. Consumer preference shifted again. Sport utility vehicles and light trucks grew dominant. By the early 2000s, SUVs comprised over half of U.S. vehicle sales. This demonstrated the tension between regulatory efficiency requirements and market desires. The global financial crisis of 2008 revealed structural vulnerabilities in legacy automakers. GM and Chrysler faced severe liquidity shortages. GM filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2009, while Chrysler required government-assisted restructuring. Ford avoided bankruptcy through internal restructuring. The crisis prompted consolidation and global integration. Chrysler merged with Fiat, forming Stellantis in 2021. This reflected the internationalization of supply chains, engineering, and market strategy. Electric vehicles, historically a niche, re-emerged. Tesla delivered the Roadster in 2008 and the Model S in 2012. This proved that EVs could offer range, performance, and desirability. GM's Chevrolet Volt and Ford's hybrid models signaled traditional manufacturers were paying attention. Electrification changed fundamental engineering principles. Electric motors, with fewer moving parts than internal combustion engines, provide instant torque. They simplify assembly, battery technology, thermal management, and software became central to competitiveness. This was not just a technical shift, it was an industrial realignment. This echoes the scale-driven revolution of 1913. American manufacturers faced a critical question. Can they lead in the next era of mobility, or will leadership shift abroad?